systems and understanding how to test the efficacy, but also implementation of behavioral health interventions in patients with life-threatening illness. We do this mostly on a monthly basis, and we're extremely honored to have Dr. Donna Spiegelman. She is the Susan Dwight Bliss Professor of Biostatistics at Yale University School of Public Health and Director of Yale's Center for Methods and Implementation and Prevention Science. She is a former NIH Director's Pioneer Award recipient from 2014 to 2020, recognized for her work developing innovative methods for implementation and prevention science. She's the author of over 800 publications and one of the world's most highly cited scientists. Her work really focuses on the development, adaptation, and dissemination of rigorous methodological approaches to address the unique challenges of implementation research. It spans step wedge designs, cluster randomized controlled trials, learn as you go trials, which she's going to be focusing on today, causal inference for non-randomized implementation trials, mediation analyses. These are all the things that I think many of us who are implementation scientists are extremely excited about. And so without further ado, I welcome Donna to provide her slides and we'll get started.
Yeah, so
A rich
thank you,
discussion.
Natalie, and everybody for being here and inviting me. And it's a pleasure to be here. So, yeah, I'm gonna, let's see, from beginning. Can we get to the from beginning? Okay. Here I am. I'm going to talk about the Learn as you go design for quantitative optimization of multi-level, multi-component intervention packages and implementation strategy bundles. And we call this the LAGO design. And from my brief conversation with Natalie before we started, it sounds like this sort of design it could be very useful for the work that you're doing at the Roybal Center. So I see we have sort of a smallish group, which is totally fine. And it also means I'm happy to take questions and comments at any point. This doesn't have to be a formal presentation in that way. But while I'm talking, I might miss the chat. So Natalie, maybe if somebody like raises their hand, just let me know or just speak up even because we can have this even a little bit more of as a discussion with the idea that I'm sharing this methodology with you all with the idea that maybe you'll literally want to use it like right now in your current or next studies. And that's what we really want to do at our center is develop. Of course, we love publishing papers and giving talks, but more than anything, we want to have an impact and we want our methods to be rigorous and relevant and be able to be used rapidly for ongoing implementation research to improve public health. So here I am, and I just wanted to say, just in case you are interested in me, because I was asked, well, why do I have this picture of me as a little girl and then me as a grown-up person? Well, it's because I gave this talk at Yale last October called a Journey Lecture, which I basically told my life story, starting from my grandparents as immigrants to the United States, from Belarus and other parts of Eastern Europe to me today. And that's if you wanted to hear more about that journey, you could listen to this at any time at some later point. So back to Learn as you go. We've been working on this design for a while now. We published our first paper in 2021 about this design in the Annals of Statistics. And I mentioned this because the Annals of Statistics is probably one of the most prestigious and theoretical journals in the field of statistics. And so why this is very important that it was published and published there is it means that this design is a rigorous statistical approach to conducting implementation research where there's no hand waving, everything is proven, we have guaranteed type 1 error rates, the 5% alpha level, and so forth. And then we've continued to do work on it. And the next paper here is our non-technical paper that we're in the process of submitting for publication. It's been posted on the archive. And I think for most people here, you might want to, if you wanted to read more about LAGO after this talk, I might point you to this paper, which should be very accessible to everybody who's working in the public health field. They don't have to have a PhD in biostatistics. And then we've been working on further extensions and things. So we have another publication in biometrics, another leading biostatistical journal, and we have another paper submitted and many others along the way. So again, this is just to emphasize the rigor. So what happens is we have, somebody has something in the chat I'm seeing. We have an intervention that could be a package consisting of multiple components. Or we could have sometimes in implementation science, we might have a single intervention and then it has an implementation strategy bundle where there's several strategies being used, tested, or included to support the intervention, but we're not really sure, say which ones to include, at what we call it a dose, which might be the intensity, the frequency, and so forth. And so LAGO can be used to figure that out. So for example, we could have, say, for an intervention. So one area I've worked on is HIV, and HIV prevention is a very important area in implementation science right now because we have such great tools, both for promoting health among people with HIV, reducing their infectiousness, and keeping people who are at high risk from getting HIV through PrEP. And so these kinds of strategies, peer mentoring, maybe once a month, maybe more often, maybe less, text message support every other day or how often, behavioral skills training every other month or how often, motivational interviewing monthly or how often, or not at all. Do we really need all four of these to have a successful PrEP intervention? Or maybe two are good enough and the other two can be dropped. So we have a starting package, whether it's a bundle of strategies or a package of intervention components. And usually in our work, that's it. We're stuck with it. We have to use it and we can't change it. And we just follow it through to the end of the study and it either, quote, worked or it didn't work. So with LAGO, that's no longer the case. So we have pre-specified stages. So maybe like two stages often happens where we analyze the data after each stage, and then we can reconfigure the intervention package based on analyses from the data, the outcome data. And the other thing that I'm sure we're all aware of that happens that actually is a big help in LAGO is we have the recommended package, like say, do peer mentoring once a month. But in real life, that doesn't really happen. Some people have participated in it twice a month. Some never did it. Some maybe went more often and so forth. And so we have a range of doses to make it possible for us to estimate the effect of peer mentoring controlling for all of the other components in relation to, say, the outcome, which could be, say, PrEP uptake or PrEP adherence or PrEP knowledge or even PrEP acceptability. And then from there, we can reconfigure the intervention package based on these. So maybe peer mentoring turns out to be very effective. We're going to increase it to twice a month. Text messaging support is not effective. We're doing it every 4 days. Behavioral skills, it's expensive and it's like modestly effective. So every other month. Motivational interviewing, maybe every other month is good enough. Then we revise the intervention package and roll it out in the next stage. And then we conduct the study continue on with the study with this revised package. Then we go back and analyze it again. And then we recommend a new package in the next stage. I'm finding in real life, because we're doing running LAGO studies in maybe 4 different contexts right now, that 2 stages seems to be all that logistically and bandwidth-wise anybody can handle, including us, the statisticians. But theoretically, you can have many stages. With the extreme, you might have heard of some of these micro-randomized trials where that would be like, many, many, many stages. But anyway, in these types of situations, we seem to think that like 2 or 3 stages seems to be adequate and also kind of feasible. And so at the end, we are seeking an effective intervention package while minimizing the package cost And we might do that by also trying to achieve a desired outcome rate, such as, say, 80% uptake of PrEP among those at high risk, or 80% adherence to PrEP, monthly PrEP pill taking. Although now we know people can basically use the injectable, and it's only necessary twice per year. So that's sort of the idea, and I'm going to elaborate on all of that now in the subsequent slides. Let's see if I can get this to go to the next page. That's I'm not getting it to advance now. Let's see. Oh, okay, it did. Maybe it was just a computer thing. So to run a LAGO study, we have inputs, and then certain things happen, and then we have outputs. So in order to know like how many stages, what sample size, how many clusters, and so forth, we need to know the sample size per stage. We need to know the number of clusters per stage. And all of this is written from the point of view that these are cluster randomized trials, because most of our interventions in implementation science usually involve things that are done kind of at a facility level or a provider level or a village level and so forth. Although theoretically, LAGO study could also work with individually randomized studies. But everything we've encountered so far is cluster randomized. And then we also, to design the study, we, as always, need the intraclass correlation coefficient, which is the correlation of outcomes between clusters compared to that within. Then we need features of the bundle to be optimized. So the number of stages to optimize, the unit cost of each strategy, a cost function, and then a guesstimate of the effect of each strategy. And then I'm going to show this all by example. Probably all sounds very vague so far. And then we need optimization goals, like the target value for the implementation goal, or to achieve sufficient statistical power for the null hypothesis that versus its alternative, that the intervention overall, the whole package, has no effect. So these are the inputs. So some of them are standard, like this first number 1 is kind of the standard, and then maybe down here a power goal is standard. And then all these other things in the middle here are kind of new things we need for LAGO. And then what happens is, what would happen is the theory is developed for the intervention. The initial intervention package is determined, the optimization criteria determined, and the cost function. Then we have the initial stage of implementation, as I described on the previous slide. And then we iterate to the subsequent stages, and then we have the final analysis. And then we get the outputs. So the outputs, as always, would be the p-value for the test of the overall intervention package effect. That would be the standard thing that we'd always be doing. And like I said, due to this rigorous mathematical statistics that we've done, we know that we have the standard valid type 1 error rate under the null. We'll get an estimate of the optimal intervention package with 95% confidence intervals around the components. We get the estimate of an impact of each component. We get an estimate of the predicted outcome goal at the recommended final package. And then we get an estimate of the cost of the final recommended package. So again, so LAGO gives us, we have to give LAGO some additional information that we didn't give before. And then we get out what we usually got, as well as all these additional things that I think are very interesting and relevant for our research in multi-component, multi-level implementation package evaluations. So this is a very technical, sort of technical way of explaining the steps of the LAGO study, which I think I'm going to skip because it seems that maybe people here, is there anybody here who actually is a statistician and would like for me to go over the kind of the notation and the sort of more, I've kind of explained in words and intuitively what we're doing, but for people who are more mathematically minded, like seeing a slide like this, helps you understand what I'm talking about, it from something that might seem to be vague. So is there anybody who would like to do that? Please, like maybe raise your hand.
I would love that.
Oh, I see.
Okay.
Possible.
All right.
Yeah.
So I'll do it. I'll try to do it quickly. So there's at least one person, but it does make it much clearer for those who are more mathematically oriented. So we developed the theory of change to inform the selection of the intervention package, which we're going to denote as little x. And it's in bold because it's a vector, like as I showed in that example with the prep example, this would have four components, I think. And then the one means at the start of stage one. And then we determine the optimization criteria, including the desired mean outcome that we want the package to achieve, and the lower and upper bounds on each of the intervention components that are allowed. Then we conduct stage one of the case stages. We collect data on the intervention strategies actually implemented. So this would be A sub J in facility J of big J facilities at stage one. And so that's where the little k is. And then the outcomes. So then we have the y in each one of the facilities at stage one. Then we determine the unit costs of each strategy in the implementation bundle. So if we have p components, then we would need p unit costs. And then we, from the data on the stage, from the data here, and then the costs will determine then it's an optimization problem, a nonlinear optimization problem. We determine the recommended intervention for stage two. Now this one is just X. This one is X hat because it's an estimate from AJ and YJ um, at stage two, and it's based on the AJ1 and the YJ1. We get the recommended. We get the recommended intervention, and then we continue. Now we're using little x hat 2, and then we see what happens in stage 2, and so we get AJ of k equals 2 and k equals 3, however, and then the outcomes. We might refine the unit costs. Then we determine the recommended intervention for stage k plus 1 based on the data collected up to stage k. So it could be A1, Y1, A2, Y2, et cetera, all the way up to AK, YK for the J facilities and the costs. And then once this iterative process is finished for the case stages, then we'll test the null hypothesis using the outcome data for all case stages. So we wouldn't be using the A or intervention data because for this analysis, it's just was the facility in the intervention group, then it's 1 or not 0, or if it's a step wedge design, it might vary. And then we estimate the overall intervention effect and the unit effects of the individual components using the outcomes and observed data all the way up to stage K. And then we estimate the final intervention package using all the data up to stage K. And then we can also estimate the per facility cost and of the optimal intervention package X hat opt and the and then and then the per facility cost of other interventions contained in the 95% confidence set because this X opt is a statistic, just like a beta or anything else, and it has uncertainty. It's a function of these observed data. And so it itself has confidence bounds. And so we can say within our certainty of what this, say, 95% confidence about what this optimal intervention is, what's the range of costs that this would have. So again, I'll try to make it a little clearer here. This is from a study that we're working on. It's from the HIV Prevention and Treatment Network based at the University of Washington. It's HPTN 096, Getting to Zero Among Highest HIV Incidents, Men Who Have Sex with Men in the American South. And we're running a LAGO here, and we're trying to improve PrEP uptake from 18% of men, high HIV incidence risk men prescribed PrEP to we're trying to get up to 43%. And to do so, the overall odds ratio for the total package needs to be 2.2. And so here, Laurent, one of the PIs, laid out all these different components and that we're going to try to optimize, such as there's going to be coalition activities. There's going to be planning of coalition activities. There's going to be attending coalition activities. There's going to be posting content on social media. There's going to be responses to the social media content. There's going to be staff at the health facilities in the target areas who participate in training. There's going to be learning launch action cycle completed, and there's going to be participants using peer support sessions. And then we have to say, okay, we have to have bounds on this. So let's do one that's sort of the percent of eligible staff who participate has to range between 0 and 1. The percent of participants using more than 2 peer supports sessions has to range between 0 and 1. And then we're trying to get to, say, 20% here, whereas here we're trying to get to 75%, and the cost has yet to be determined. But these are the kind of input parameters we need. Like if we don't have these bounds, and then we don't have costs, we can't optimize. And then, of course, the investigators have to decide what they actually want to try to optimize. They have to break down, like through a logic model, what is this intervention really about? And what are all the steps and things we're doing? So now I'm going to talk about another case study that has just completed. It's called the Police of Uganda study of integration of hypertension care into HIV clinics in and around Kampala, Uganda. And here is the published paper on the design of this trial. And you can see that I'm a co-author. I'm one of the lead statisticians, or I am the lead statistician for this trial. And what the purpose of this, as some of you may know, that we've had these very PEPFAR has been working predominantly in sub-Saharan Africa for maybe 20 or 30 years, providing different types of support to create very, very good health care for people living with HIV. And it's been so successful that HIV is now in sub-Saharan Africa, as well as pretty much everywhere else in the world, a chronic disease, which means that people all over the world are aging with HIV and coming into facilities now with all the common issues of aging, such as hypertension, diabetes, cognitive decline, orthopedic issues, and so forth. And so there has been a lot of interest at NHLBI to try to integrate some of chronic disease care into the healthcare facility. Some of this has changed now with USAID being abolished, but this was work that was going on for the past 5 or 6 years. And so here we're integrating hypertension care into some very large HIV facilities that had been supported by PEPFAR in the Kampala, which is the capital city of Uganda, and then Wakiso, which is right around that capital city. So these were the package components, access to antihypertension medicines. And so this is to look at so the goal is for patients to be in hypertension control. So whether they're hypertensive or they have to be screened, and then maybe they're not hypertensive and they have to be repeatedly screened to make sure they don't develop it, or we screen them and they are hypertensive and then they need hypertension care. So we have to first have access to the medicines. And so that would involve, we measure that by a 1 month supply prescribed to a hypertensive patient, and that can range between 0 and 3. So there's the idea that maybe patients can get 3 months of medicine, like they get their HIV medicines now pretty much every 3 months if they're stable. And so we'll look at those bounds, and differentiated service delivery is, should they get it monthly or can they get the 3 month supplies? Then another component is, can we distribute the medications in the community, or do they have to come into the facilities? And then there's access to the BP machines, that is, if they're being measured, getting their blood pressure measured in the facilities. And then the staff has to be trained. Second. The staff has to be trained for hypertension care. They're already very, very good at HIV care, but don't necessarily, they're out of practice with hypertension care. And then there's a performance improvement program that could involve monthly audit feedback reviews and problem solving and so forth. And then we put a unit cost on this, and we had health economists working with us. So it was estimated in US dollars that it cost $2.91 for a monthly supply of hypertensive drugs supplied. And then if it's supplied through a multi-month dispensing, it's 7.09, but that's over really averaged over, say, a 3-month period. So then it's actually less. And then here it's 2.44, so it's a little bit less if it's dispensed in the community. Blood pressure measurement per patient is very cheap, 5 cents. It's about 4 hours to train an eligible provider. And then it's $2.9 to have an eligible provider participate in a monthly performance improvement program. So this is the kind of information that we need to run a LAGO study. And you can think about whether how you might create, we call this a LAGO table, how you could create such a LAGO table in your study. Okay, and then we need to measure these components. So in order to look at their effects to optimize, we need to measure these components in the data as it's going on. So we found that this is just overall, 73% of patients had their blood pressure measured. Only 6% had their blood pressure monitored in the community. Hypertensive patients got an average of 1.3 monthly supplies of medicine. About 40% were getting multi-month prescriptions. For eligible providers, we're having an average of like 20 minutes per month of training. And they were having about only like maybe 0.2, of 10 minutes of performance improvement average per month for the performance improvement. So this is what was happening in the intervention group. Of course, it's all, most of these would be 0 in the control group, although there was still some blood pressure being measured in the control group and some dispensation of medicines in the control group, even without the intervention. And so then another thing we have to look at, and this is tricky because you might know that if you design a study and you give everybody has to do like 4 things exactly the same, then we don't really have the ability, and everyone adheres completely, we wouldn't have the ability to estimate the independent component effects. So this shows us like how highly correlated were these components. And you can see, there was quite a bit of range of these being done. And so, but with the amount of data that we have, we can easily estimate independent effects with this amount of correlation of the components. So that was good news. And then here I'm showing you what the outcome is. So the outcome is blood pressure control. And so in the control period, like 47% had their blood pressure controlled of all patients, including non-hypertensives. And you can see it's a very large study. So there's this is preliminary data. It's not the full end data of the study. And at the point that we did this second LAGO phase, there were over 63,000 patients going to these 16 facilities. And there were over 134,000 visits, of whom 1,500 were hypertensive, and 14% of those had their blood pressure under control. So there's a lot of room for improvement here, for sure. A lot of room. And then the next thing we have to specify is something about the cost function. So one idea is that, it costs the same no matter how many people are getting it or how much of it is being done versus how little. But I think in economics, there's these ideas of economy of scale and also things being more costly when there's only a little bit of something being done. So we decided that it did make sense to take into account at least a little bit of these subtleties of costing. And we ended up using this green cost function, which is at the lower doses of the intervention, it's a little more costly. And then in the mid range, this is like the most. The lower limit and this is the upper limit. So this is giving antihypertensives. So first it's kind of expensive, but then when people are getting like 1 to 2 per day, I mean, say 1 to 2 monthly supplies at each visit, maybe there's an economy of scale, but then as it starts to go up, it becomes prohibitive. And it doesn't make sense, or it's not even possible to give more than 3, say. So this is kind of another thing we have to specify, and we use these kind of very light touch economy of scale type cost functions. And we have that for each one. So then this is kind of a very busy slide, but this in itself could be a paper, and it's somebody is working on such a paper. And what this tells us is what was the actual effect in the data of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 components of the intervention. And then we can see among all patients where we now have 180,000 visits here, and then the hypertensive patients where we have 16,000. And so you can see we have a strong effect overall of giving the medication, a weak effect in the hypertensive patients. We had a very strong effect of screening. This is on blood pressure control in both all patients and hypertensive patients. We saw a modest effect of training eligible providers on blood pressure control. We didn't see a benefit really of dispensing multi-months. And we didn't see much of a benefit of dispensing medications in the community. We did, and then let's see, what else do we have here? We saw um, no effect, very weak effect of community blood pressure monitoring. And then we did see a very nice benefit of the performance improvement plan of the performance improvement program. So these kind of, you can see how it's going to hint at, well, what should we do going forward? This was at stage 2. Maybe something should be dropped. Like we ended up recommending that multi-month prescriptions don't seem like a good idea. 0.88 means they're actually harmful, and they were significantly so. And you can think of some reasons why that might be the case. Similarly, community dispensation didn't seem to be doing much good overall, and maybe even could have been harmful. Maybe these things have found in very advanced, many years of experience with HIV in facilities and among HIV positive patients. Some of these things have turned out to be very useful, but for people in facilities who are just starting to do hypertension care and think about themselves as having this comorbidity, they might need to be coming in every month and not be doing things in the community. So to optimize, we want to achieve 80% blood pressure control among all patients, up from 47%. We want to achieve 80% blood pressure control among hypertensive patients. Now, that could be unrealistic. That's such a huge improvement. Like, the relative risk of this is like 4. We don't usually see relative risks of 4s in studies. And this is another like little aside in designing implementation projects. We're often starting from a very low bar of things that are in the national guidelines and in national policy and district policy that should be done. So it's not like we don't have to convince policymakers. The gaps are happening like at the facility level and at the patient level, not really at that very high level. And often very big achievements need to happen. And so we're trying to find the combination of doses of these 6 components that achieve these 2 goals at the lowest cost. And then we also might want to do that and then provide at least 80% power for the test of the difference between hypertension control rates between control and intervention arms at the end of the study. So we're kind of also saying, in addition to optimizing with LAGO, I mentioned maybe in the beginning about the voltage drop, and people keep talking about failed trials and, kind of disappointing findings and so forth. And with LAGO, it's possible to strengthen the intervention while the study's going on to reduce the chances that at the end we're going to have a null result or an underpowered result. And so this paper, which has been submitted but is in the review process, which you can pick up at Archive, is adding that enhancement to LAGO. So this shows us the optimization in PALISA. So first of all, these are again the components up here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I don't know how, oh, I know why. We had to cross-classify because there were interactions. And then we have the total cost. We have the estimated outcome rate in all patients and hypertension patients to see how we achieved the goal. So it recommended that the recommended monthly supply should be 1.5, which probably means most patients should be getting 1, but some can get 3. The proportion dispensed at multi-month was 50%. Oh, no, I'm sorry. It suggested it was saying 50% at the end. That's what we were seeing, but we're saying the optimal intervention says not to dispense multi-month. It's also saying not to dispense in the community. It's saying that basically most patients should be getting their medicine in the community as a single month, supply, and that a small percentage can get it in the facility. And then it's saying that maybe like 2/3 of patients should be screened every month. There should be 5.4 hours of training per month. And that 80% of eligible providers should participate in performance feedback. So this is the optimal intervention based on the data, and that the cost, 74% of the cost is in dispensing the drugs. And then 20% of the cost is from measuring blood pressure. And then really just 6% is on these HR interventions, training and audit feedback, but they're nevertheless important and recommended. So this is what we got at stage 2, and now we're redoing this for the final recommended with all of the data. So I'm getting close to my conclusion, but I mean, I hope that you can see from this example that LAGO will answer the effectiveness question. Did the adapted and refined intervention improve outcomes versus control? The optimization question, what is the most cost-effective combination of components and dosages to achieve a target goal? And then the component question, which specific components drove success and by how much? And then how do we interpret results from a LAGO study? We have the global test of the null hypothesis that compares the LAGO adapted intervention versus control. Significance shows adaptive framework outperforms standard of care. The optimal package, the model estimates the lowest cost combination achieving the goal. The confidence set includes alternative packages statistically likely to also achieve the goal. And then the application, policymakers can select feasible packages or estimate optimal packages for new contexts. So I mentioned the non-technical manuscript. Here it is, and here's the link to it in the archive. Here is some of the work in progress, publicly available software. Developing methods for the optimal design, extending to multi-level data, survival data, general link functions, controlling for confounding due to random and non-random adherence to protocol, something we're calling Q-LAGO, incorporating qualitative information at each stage to inform recommended packages for the next stage. We're applying LAGO to PALISA, which I talked about, TaskPen and MapIt, which are two similar studies similar to TaskPen and MapIt, integrating hypertension care into HIV clinics in Zambia and Nigeria. The Medley study that's developing interventions to improve care for patients with heart failure in Uganda, and the HPTN study, which I showed a little bit of, that's incorporating LAGO into PrEP uptake and status neutral care for people at risk for and positive for HIV. And then here's the team of people who we've been working on this. Auntie Bing, this was a focus of his PhD dissertation, and he's now has a very good job at Google and Texas. And now Min is a PhD student at BU, Ray at a PhD student with me at Yale. Jingyu is a postdoc with me here at Yale, and then Shin and Drew are faculty members. And this is just a little bit about the CMIPS team, so I introduce you to some. And these are, in addition to LAGO, these are a number of other issues and topics that we're working on developing methodologies for, particularly in HIV/AIDS, NCDs, mental health, maternal and child health. And, these are all the different people in our group. So thank you. It was a pleasure to go over all of this. And I'd be happy to take questions, discussion, and so forth.
That was really excellent. I think we're very, very lucky to have heard your talk. You've done such amazing work and also with such real world impact, global impact as well. I saw a lot of enthusiasm in the chat about learning about LAGO. Jillian asked, can you clarify how the upper and lower bounds for components are identified? Are these bounds in the actual delivery?
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing, Julian, would you be willing to just say a component that you might be considering in one of your studies? And then I'll guess what bounds could be, and then we can refine it.
Sure.
And
So, for instance, motivational interviewing sessions.
okay, and so in your study, how often are those happening?
It can vary quite a bit, but I would say once every week or two.
Mhm. Yeah, so let's say you start your study and one of your components is motivational interviewing, and you probably do have to say whether it's once a week or twice a week. Or you could just leave it up to the study participants who could be the providers and the facilities to decide contextually what works. And then you can say, okay, so one option, the lower bound would be 0 in a multi-component study, that maybe motivational interviewing isn't even important after you like text message and do 5 other things. So we can allow for dropping it. But it also could turn out that you find that it's really important for your goal, which might be, say, lowering the depression scores by 2 points. So you could say, well, what could you do more? Could you really do it more than once a week anyway? Or is that really the upper bound? So then your range could be from 0 to once per week, and it could allow once every other week, once every 3 weeks, once a month, once every 2 months. And so that full whole, and then probably in real life, you're going to see all of these situations. And so we can estimate it just like an exposure in an epidemiologic study. What's the effect of the rate of motivational interviewing? And then from there, and then that you cost it, like how much does it cost if it's a provider? How much does it cost the provider to do that motivator? And you could even be counting the cost for the patient, like are there opportunity costs if they have to leave work to get to the session, or then take an hour off and then get back, or maybe they can do it online, so it's just that hour. So you put in all the costs, and then you might have other things you're doing that we need to fine tune their frequency or their intensity, and then also their cost.
Hmm.
So does that give you a good idea of how you figure out that upper and lower bound?
Yes, and you mentioned if it turns out to be really effective, the finding that that component is effective relies on there being variation in how many sessions are offered.
Hmm.
Okay.
I've
Mm.
never yet once seen that we don't see variation in these things in real life
Sure.
data. So, yeah, there's
Sure.
tons of variation. And so we have a lot of statistical power to pick up things because of that. And how much, and somebody said, how much variation do you need? Well, that's why I showed you that correlation table.
Mhm.
Because like in PALISA, like two components were correlated by 0.63, but you could see we had this huge sample size. So we could estimate all the independent effects very well. But if we had a correlation of 0.63 and you only had like 100, patient visits, it might be hard to really do this and estimate their independent effects with any certainty. So, like, I'm working on another study with some colleagues where we're doing post hoc analysis of this kind on a study in China that's trying to improve care for patients after a first stroke incident, which could be relevant to some of the things you guys are doing, although it's in a very different kind of rural Chinese context with people who are many of whom are not literate and so forth. But the components were very, very highly correlated. And so it was really limited how much we could separate out their effects. So it's a function of how highly correlated they are, and then how big the sample size is.
Mm.
Yeah, and I appreciate so great to see the cost being considered up front, but you need to have a health economist involved. So, in a lot of implementation studies, like, we have an aim on, implementation outcomes, an aim on health effectiveness outcomes, and an aim on cost. But sometimes you don't. And then if you don't have the health economists involved, then you're not going to have that cost data, and you're not going to be able to do this. And sometimes the health economics activities are at the end of the study, but actually to do this, you have to be doing it from the very beginning, which is actually good for the study because if you wait till the end to do the health economics, I've found that it often never gets done. The data just aren't there. The study ends, everybody runs out of money, and then we never really do the economic evaluation.
Mhm.
So I find it's very helpful to be doing the health economics all along.
We have
Yeah,
another
so
question. Yeah.
Ian, that's a very good question about selection factors in terms of the variation, because we're assuming that it's random non-adherence, which conditional on facilities. So if it's a cluster leveled study, as all of these studies that I've worked with so far and named are cluster, then we control for facility as a fixed effect, and then we control for time as a fixed effect. And then hopefully we've eliminated most of the residual confounding. But it's an issue we need to look at a little bit more because it's possible that it does. I mean, when you think about big studies in public health settings, um, it's hard to think about intentionality of people like adjusting the levels of these components and responses to outcomes because usually people are just like sort of struggling to do things in,
Mhm.
very constrained situations where people are being asked to do too much with not enough money. And even in the United States and many of our public health situations, it's like that. So, but it's another issue in LAGO that, we want to look at. But don't forget, this is just to recommend the optimal intervention. And it doesn't bias the test of the null hypothesis.
Yeah.
So if the optimal intervention is a little off because there was some confounding by indication, then we may have just, maybe not done the absolutely perfect thing, but we're
Mhm.
probably going to do a lot better than being stuck with that baseline intervention, even when we start to see that things aren't working like they should.
Yeah, makes sense. Any thoughts in terms of the kinds of outcomes that you need? So BP is a nice one because those are, relatively done pretty often, and there is, you know, there is some white coat hypertension and other issues at play, but they're all
Hmm.
measured more or less the same. And so, what happens when you have outcomes? I know we've come into like certain outcomes, like depressive symptoms that are measured kind of all over the place, and there's a lot of false negatives and how they're measured, how they're administered, et cetera, as one of the outcomes that you're looking at here for the optimization piece.
Well, let's say if you were doing that in optimizing. So with depression, I know there's like some standard set of questions. I forget how many. Is it
Yeah.
16?
Yeah, there's like the PHQ-9, for example, and things
And is
like
that
that.
16?
There are 9 items to
Nine.
it. Yeah,
Okay. So you can, that doesn't seem that hard to do, like
yeah,
say every 3 or 4 months to ask either everybody in the study or even a random subset the
yeah.
9 questions.
Mm,
And, they're not perfect. And it's just like, Ian's question about maybe some confounding of the estimates of the
yeah,
components because
yeah,
of, choosing confounding by indication.
yeah.
So that's not a perfect outcome, but we say you can use a surrogate outcome.
Mm,
And so even you necessarily, maybe I have worked a little bit in this, and even, you can reduce that 9 question scale even down to 2 questions without
yeah.
losing that
Hmm.
much information. And so even just like texting people the 2 questions, every 4 months would be enough to
Yeah.
have a surrogate outcome for optimization.
Yeah, yeah. But if you're doing this in the real world, it really needs to be done under a trial design where people are getting where you have control over this, as opposed to real world settings where you can't really control when PHQs are being administered, if they're being administered correctly, etc.
Well, I'm not sure, if are you talking doing a study or are you talking about a study in the real world? Is that
A
what you're
study
talking
in the
about?
real world, yeah, where you might be leveraging ongoing screening. So blood pressure is a
Okay.
nice one because screening is already happening in the real world very often, but at different time points and other things. But if you were to do something like this in the real world, I would just wonder what
Yeah,
that
I
might look
might
like.
think that if you're in the real world, are you enrolling people and following them longitudinally, or are you cross-sectionally sampling, or just observing who's like
You're just
available?
observing. So if you're randomizing at the clinic level, maybe you're delivering, like, again, capacity building, system level, provider level strategies, and you are interested in some of the patient level outcomes without necessarily recruiting or consenting
Hmm.
patients
Hmm.
to get a little bit more
Yeah.
of a generalizable
Yeah, so let's
sample.
say if I was working with you in this situation, I think I would suggest that we would have to have a sub-study that
Hmm.
might require maybe a higher level of consent, where people, it wouldn't have to be every single person in the system, but maybe even like say 100 or 250 who are randomly text like the 2 questions
Yeah.
so that we can take the pulse of what's going on. You have
Mm.
to have something.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Makes
mean,
sense.
maybe cross-sectionally,
Hmm.
since who's ever coming in the facilities in that period, we could just use that cross-sectional data.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And since the intervention is going on, it doesn't have to be the same people. It could just be, we would expect if the facilities are taking this up at
Yeah.
different doses, we should
Yep.
see
Hmm.
impact on the depression scores, even
Yeah.
if it's not the same people.
Yep. That's very good. I see Ian had another question here, thoughts on how this contrasts with factorial experiments, like Linda Collins. Is it about feasibility,
Yeah, so
etc.?
how we see this as, like most Linda Collins methods are about, there's phase one, or I think it's most stage one, two, and three. So stage
Mhm.
one is the formative work,
Yeah.
which, like we say, also, of course, you have to do that formative work before you start LAGO. Then
Hmm.
stage two is the factorials experiment. And so that helps you refine the intervention package before stage three, when you start the study with the
Yeah.
fixed package.
Hmm.
So you can do most, in fact, we're working on a proposal right now where we're going to try to do most phase two to figure out the starting package through
Mm.
factorial experiments, which are usually, they have to be very short term, like 3 months. And then we'll use that for the starting package. And then we'll further refine that complex package in 2 further LAGO steps.
Mm.
So it's sort of like not an either or, because most phase three is just running a regular trial with your fixed package that you figured out from the factorial experiment.
Interesting. Yeah.
Can I ask one more question? Sorry if I'm hogging the spotlight. Just wondering, how do you think about that some of the differences that you're seeing, that you're trying to learn from as you go, are very like site specific. Like maybe it's that at one practice it works well this way, another practice it works
Mhm.
another way. Is that somehow able to I guess do subgroup? And I don't know how you think about that part.
Well, when you have an absolute goal, like say you want 80% of something or you wanted the score to change, it might have just naturally have the interventions can have a bigger impact on the absolute scores, even when there's no interaction on the multiplicative scale, actually. But you can say, and we haven't done this yet, um, you could look at component by like facility characteristic interactions, like large versus small in PALISA, or urban versus peri-urban, or private or public versus there's something like not-for-profit that are not private. And so you can look for interactions and you can literally optimize for the different subgroups. But at least in the kind of resource challenge settings that I've been working in so far, like we can barely like get a single intervention out to everybody, much less thinking, okay, you do this here, and then the next one you do this here. And I'm sure, like you guys know, those of you who are clinicians, it's very hard to have these tailored protocols and have them be done with fidelity
Yeah.
when they're depending on so many different characteristics and
Right.
things.
Right.
Yeah.
Super helpful.
Mhm. Right. Any other questions? We're right at the top of the hour. This is so great. It was very nice to actually make this interactive so people could ask
Yeah.
questions about their own work. Yeah, so it was really a privilege to have you. Thank you so much. We'll be disseminating this out to our network as well, hopefully, and we'll send it to you so you can disseminate it out to your network as well.
Yeah,
And
great. We'll
hopefully this
definitely
is,
do that. So yeah, nice
yes.
meeting you all, those of you who are meeting, and thank you for hosting me. It's a pleasure
Yes, of
talking to you
course.
all.
Thank you.